Impact. Real human interest stories ranging from the ordinary to the truly extraordinary.
Disclaimer. The opinions expressed by the guest and interviewee and those providing comments are theirs alone and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of VX3 Exchange or any employee thereof. VX3 Exchange is not responsible for accuracy of any of the information supplied by the guest. It is not the intention of VX3 Exchange to malign any community, religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, or individual.
Hello. This is Fatima Hussein, and you're listening to Season 2 of Impact, the program which introduces you to extraordinary human interest stories from around Canada. Dominic Akena was 9 years old when he first held a gun. He was abducted from his village in Uganda and trained to be a child soldier. One fine day, he escaped the clutches of the rebels and found his way to a refugee camp. 4 years later, in this camp, he meets a pair of documentary filmmakers who capture the story of his harrowing escape, and this encounter ultimately changes his life. Today, Dominic is a documentary filmmaker based in Toronto who uses film to process his traumatic past.
My name is Dominic Akena. I am 25 years old, man from Uganda. My story is the story of a child soldier. I was a former child soldier from the guerrilla war in northern Uganda, started by a warlord named Joseph Kony. I was born in 1994, and when I was about 7 years old, that was around 2001. So I was just a kid, just playing in my village. There was just empty land, just me, the village members, my family, and handless land to play. So growing up, I didn't pay attention to what was happening. I was a kid, so only adults could talk about this kind of issues. War, government, but the guerrilla war that would soon really destroy our lives started from afar. It started in some parts of South Sudan, started around the border of Uganda and Sudan. That's where the leader was hiding at the time and abducting people and taking people up there. I didn't know where those places are. I couldn't even pronounce them, but they were sort of nearby villages. Eventually, the rebel activities came closer and closer to my village. I remember distinctively one day in July of 2001 precisely. At night time, my mother and my sibling and I were sleeping in our mud hut, and very early in the morning at the break of dawn, she woke us up from our sleep that something was wrong. So we came out of the mud hut and we stood on our compound. So I could see from a distance there was like a bright, burning, bright flame, like bright light. The sky was all lit up in different colors, and it was unusual because we're never used to seeing things like that. And the next morning, the news broke that the rebel had attacked a very close by nearby village. They abducted children, killed a bunch of people, and that was also when they killed and cooked people on the cooking pot. And that was a big news because it was something that never happened in my village before, and that sets out 20-year-long motion for ruthless killing and abducting children into a full-blown civil war that was being operated by the rebel leaders and the guerrilla rebel groups called the LRA. The LRA stand for the Lord Resistance Army, and the idea behind their movement was that the Supreme Leader Joseph Kony, his brainwashing strategy is to tell new abducted child soldiers that he speaks to God and that God told him to abduct children and mobilize and organize an army. I don't know if it was to fight the president of Uganda or to fight the justice system in Uganda, but nobody knew what the overall motivation for him to do that was. But at the end of the day, it was just abducting his own people and killing his own people. I'm ashamed to say that it's my tribe. It's part of the Acholi tribe. They speak the same language. They speak Luo, like myself. I speak Luo and I'm an Acholi person. So it was quite weird to learn that your own people is doing this to you. I came to learn about his personality, about his identity a little bit later on when I was abducted by one of his rebel groups. Before that, I never saw a rebel in my entire life. So when my mother and other elderly people in the village described the rebel, I actually had a different visual image in my head about what the rebels look like, what the guerrilla rebels look like. I thought they look a bit animalistic and they look a bit like a monster, something that is not human, because what they describe that these rebels would do to people, it doesn't seem like something a human could do to another human. And from my childhood imagination, growing up listening to stories about monsters and those traditional teaching, I then associated those stories with what the rebels would look like. So I was quite curious. The adults are running and telling us to go hide in the forest because the rebels are coming. In the back of my head, I was like, I really want to stay back and see what they look like. And the adults would tell me, don't wish for that. Don't wish for something bad to happen to you. Don't wish to see them, because you eventually see them. And when you do, you're not going to like them. But I was a kid. It was not until I turned about 9 and 10 where I started to see people with actual physical injuries on their body. Some of their limbs got cut off, their families were killed. So that started to not be funny to me anymore as a kid. I have to listen to my mother every night at nightfall. When it's dark, you can't really see anything, and you can't sleep in your house, because that's when they come and they surprise you in your sleep, and then they will abduct you in your sleep. So what my mother and the rest of the village members started to do was to go hide in the forest every night, rain or shine. You have to go, you have to grab whatever you can use to sleep outside, and you have to go hide in the forest. Luckily, Africa is warm enough. You can take a blanket and a mat, but if it rains, you just have to deal with the mosquitoes. We didn't have mosquito net, so imagine sleeping outside every night, rain or shine. You have to go. That's just what it is, to protect yourself. From that day, from July 1st, 2001, from the first attack that happened nearby our village, we started to sleep outside, leaving our home to camp out outside in the woods. And there's lots of dangerous snakes, other wildlife, so it wasn't safe anywhere. And I got malaria a little over 20 times from that. One day, when my older brother and I, from another mother, so he's a half brother to me, him and I decided we don't want to go sleep outside in the forest anymore. We couldn't take the beating from the rain every night, every day, and every morning we would wake up with our stuff soaking wet. It's just not a healthy way to live. We had like skin rashes, we had all this bad skin condition from sleeping in our wet clothes, sometimes standing out for a couple of hours, because you just can't sleep in the wet ground and you can't go back into the house. So we came up with a different idea. We lived near a primary school, and that's where we would go study during the day. Even going to school during the day was tricky, because it's dangerous to have a handful of kids sitting in a classroom. The rebel can just round the place, and a number of cases, a number of times around my village, they came and attacked the school during daytime, and they took a handful of kids. So even staying in classroom during the day was not ideal. So we would study with 2 years peel. One year you're listening to a teacher teaching you, and the other here is you're listening if someone's shouting if the rebels are coming, so you can just run home. So my 14-year-old brother at the time and my 9-year-old self decided that we won't go hide in the forest. And that one time when we came to sleep in the classroom building was the night that the rebel broke in through the window. They came in the middle of the night screaming with lots of flashlights, and they started to hit us with the bump stock of the gun, and they were very physical, telling us not to look at their eyes, just face down and behind your back. And then they started to tie all the kids, including myself, tie your hand behind your back. They grab you by your arm, and then they stand you up. They had this one long rope where they tied all of us in chain, because the idea was that if one person tried to run, how could you run with 10 other people behind you? So that was their strategy, to tie us all together in chain in one single rope. It worked, because it kept us all together, and they pushed us outside of the classroom building into the dark outside at night. It was pitch black. You can't really see anything. I could barely see the person who was in front of me. And then they told us to start walking straight up into the forest. I didn't know where we were going. I was scared, and at that point I realized that these rebels are just as people as me, but they're just crazy and they have guns, and I was terrified of that. At that time, at that moment, my imagination as a kid, the rebels being animalistic in a way, I was still very afraid, but now I knew that I was dealing with people with guns, and the fear of the rebels only grew stronger, because the next morning they divided us off into 2 groups, and my brother luckily got separated into another group, and then I went with the other group. And what they started to do that was really frightening, anytime a kid tried to escape, they would either shoot them on the spot, or they'll catch that kid, they'll come back, put everybody to sit and watch, and then they'll make an example of that kid. I didn't want to freak out. I didn't want to do any of that. I was numb most of the time, emotionally numb. I couldn't believe what was happening. It's been several hours since we were abducted. We haven't eaten or had water, kept walking. Where are we going? What are we doing? Eventually that went on for several weeks. For me, the reason why I stayed strong was because the rebels kept telling us, if you try to escape, we will kill you. But also, why would you want to escape? We already found where your family are, and we killed all of them. There's no reason for you to go back. So this is your family now. You're going to be fighting for us. I did not believe that, obviously, because I knew where my mother used to take us to hide. It's one of the best spots to hide from the rebels. I mean, I just kept that information within me, and something that guided me throughout the process. So I was like, one day I will have my shot, and I will escape, and I will go back home, and I'll find my family. I was there for about a month, 2 weeks of being active abductee, which I didn't do anything. I was just being pushed around, being told what to do, being told to carry things. And then 2 weeks of quote-unquote training to become child soldier, where they started to train us how to take guns apart and how to sort of put it together and fire, what to do when you're having a crossfire with the government soldiers, because that was happening almost every 10 minutes. Because the government soldiers right behind them trying to teach us how to be ruthless at doing certain things. Like, if we go to the next town, this is what you're gonna do. You're going to go to this family, you're gonna go to these people, you're gonna steal their goats and chicken. Not really steal, you're gonna take them. You're gonna abduct other children. So we keep recruiting, and you're gonna make people scared of you by inflicting pain on other people. There was supposed to be a test where they would test the strength of your loyalty, obedience. That was the hard part, where they make child soldiers do things to make sure that they're ready. They're fearless, they can kill, they can hurt, they can loot, they can do that. And once they go through that process, then they would take you to the leader, to Joseph Kony, and he would have to induct you in himself. I never experienced it because I never got to that point, but the idea was that Kony would put a spell on you, so to speak. That way you become a real soldier for him. And if you find yourself in a crossfire situation, his spirit will protect you from the bullet, so you become invincible, to some degree invisible. This were the lesson that they were telling us every day. But also there were rumors about Kony that he sees things and he hears things and he knows things before they happen. So if you were thinking about killing him, before you do it, he will know, and he will have his commander and somebody from his team take you behind the tree and kill you. I was afraid, literally, to think about this man. A month into our abduction, they said, okay, this batch of kids are ready. Let's start moving them to South Sudan so we can meet the supreme leader. The first day we walked about 25 kilometers. It was a journey across the country, really, from northern Uganda to South Sudan to meet the man. From what I heard about Kony, I didn't want to meet the man. But most importantly, I didn't want to be a child soldier. And the third reason is I wanted to escape them, come back to find my family. So that evening, we walked for, must have been 30 kilometers without break. And then the first break we got, everybody passed out asleep. It was like dark. Even the rebels themselves, everybody was exhausted. And I figured that was the right time for me to escape, because we hadn't gone too far, as opposed to realizing that I want to escape in Sudan. That would have been impossible to get back to my village. So after I managed to escape the rebel groups, I was on my own for about a week. It was a tough walk back to my village. I was lost. I was really small and really skinny, so I couldn't carry a lot of stuff. I had one really ripped, torn apart knapsack that I had. I put one of the cassava that we sort of roasted on the fire, and cassava can last for a couple of days. I put 2 cassavas in my backpack, and so that's what I ate for most of the time. But I couldn't eat a lot of it because there was no water. For the weapon, there was a rebel leader that was in charge of me, so I was kind of like his little, not really assistant, but I was his responsibility, because the chain of command is that if I escaped, he would be in trouble. I took his handgun and I took the backpack, and then that's what I ran with. I got out of the camp where we settled up, I think around midnight. I figured out that everybody's asleep then, that they couldn't hear me sort of sneak away. So from midnight until about 3 or 4, I just kept running, not really caring about what, it was dark anyway, so the idea of direction was just, I just was running not to be caught, because once I took 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet away from the rebel, that is considered escaping. And if someone were to find me in those parameters, they're going to be like, he's trying to escape, let's make an example of him. So I made sure that whatever plan I got to get away, that was it. So I kept running until the next day. I felt really exhausted. But once the dawn broke and the sun started to rise a little bit, this is where another one of my childhood teaching sort of came into play. My mother and my parents used to tell me how to tell directions, by which direction is the sun rising and which direction is the sun setting. And around midday, when the sun is right in the center, I would sit under the tree and rest. I kept following the direction of the sun until I came across an abandoned village. At that time, the government of Uganda already forcefully moved every village member into internally displaced camp. They brought everybody into a piece of land where maybe 20 families supposed to have to live there. Now tens of thousands of people are forced into this camp, and the idea was that government soldiers would patrol around the camp 24 hours a day. If you're in the camp, you're civilian, you're good. If you're outside the camp, you must still be rebel. So that was their strategy, to like distinguish between rebel and civilian. For me, luckily, I came across this abandoned village. At the time, I wanted to find people. I just wanted to find anybody. I was still maybe about 200 kilometers away from home, from my village. I was far. This abandoned village, there was one gentleman, an older man, and he refused to go to the camp because he said if I'm gonna die, I might as well die in my own land. That was his logic. So he didn't want to go. He just stayed under his mango tree. He was just living his life as if nothing was happening. So he saw me. I thought he would be scared of me. I had a gun. I was a child soldier. By definition, I was a rebel. And at that time, I also had a pretty big cut on my leg that was getting infected from all this walking. He spent a few days treating that. He would boil water and he would dab the wound with a piece of cloth and it would make me food. And eventually, I started to force him to take me to my village. And he had an idea. He said, I can't take you to your village. It's too far. What I can do is I can take you to the nearby government military barrack and then they will take you to your family. I was like, no, I don't want to see a military anybody, because the rebels told us when I was in captivity that if you escaped and the government soldiers catches you or if they find you, they won't take you to your family. They will kill you because that's what they do. They kill rebels. So I had that in my head and he was like, son, that's the only way you're going to get home. And he was like, if I take you to government military barrack, you have to lose that gun. Throw it away. Bury it. You can't bring it with you. So I was like, no. The next day, he got me on his bicycle and he took me to the nearby barrack. He put the bike and myself, maybe probably half a kilometers before he approached the government soldier. He explained the situation. And so the person who came back with him was a general. And then the general came barehanded and he told me he wasn't going to hurt me. So they drove me to my village and I reunited with my family in a camp. Completely different place than I left 2 months ago. The village was gone. I joined the crowd of some 20,000 people in this camp. It was a different lifestyle, so I lived in the camp for 2 or 3 years, just sort of surviving. And it was tough because my family and everybody else just sit around waiting for the UN, the United Nations, to bring food. And every month they would bring a truck full of food and people would just get that and the food would last for like 2 weeks. And it was chaotic. I decided to go back to school. So that's when I started to pick up playing musical instruments as a way to start getting back into the normality of things. And I started by playing a wooden xylophone. It was part of the school facilities. I wasn't a musician back then, but I taught myself how to play the xylophone. And eventually it became part of the school program put together for the kids. The idea is that a small group of students who like to sing and dance and play musical instruments, they would organize and put together a class of performances and they would go to the nearby town and compete. If you win, you go to the next town and compete, and I'm performing at the national level in the capital city of our country, Kampala. So that was the big dream, because what we didn't know as a community is that that was the Ministry of Education program. Every other kid around Uganda was participating, except northern Uganda, because we were just too busy running away from war. And when we were preparing for that, a documentary filmmaker from Washington, D.C., who heard about the war, decided to visit. He was a very curious storyteller. He wanted to tell the story about a war that was happening at a particular place from the eyes of children who had seen it, been in it, lived it. For some miraculous reason, he met me and he chose me to be subject in the documentary. The documentary is called War Dance, so it was about kind of using music and finding music as a vehicle to escape that traumatic memory we all experience and to overcome the adversity. It was screened at TIFF, it went to Sundance, it was nominated for an Academy Award and Oscar back in 2007. Someone from Toronto saw the film. When the film was done, I was invited to speak at an event for a charitable organization. Somebody who was in the audience, who was a teacher at Appleby College in Oakville, saw me speak up there, and I played my xylophone, and I could barely speak English, but I would say a word or two. I said something like, I want to go to school and I want to be a doctor. And so he decided to act, and he decided to take this story back to Appleby, back to his school, and he said, why don't you bring that boy over? That's what started everything. Long story short, I arrived in Canada in September 2008 to start 9th grade. After finishing high school, then I went to Pennsylvania, to Franklin and Marshall College. That's where I studied filmmaking and psychology. I chose those two fields for two reasons. A, because I wanted to be a filmmaker. I wanted to be the next person to create a story that will help someone else in some other way. The second part of the reason why I studied psychology was to go back to Uganda and provide counseling help to mostly former child soldiers who had never had the chance to talk to someone about what happened. Counseling therapy isn't easily something people go to in my village in Uganda. It's not a culture there. It's not a thing. I see myself becoming a storyteller. I believe this world is only getting crazier and crazier with a lot of things happening. I want to be someone who is going to take the time and opportunity to tell the story about the world that we live in. I think that's the most comfortable